Hello everyone, I'm so glad you're here. Tonight I'm here to help you unwind, slow down, and let your thoughts drift gently into sleep. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and I'm honored to be part of that quiet moment in your evening. So before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Now, get comfortable. Close your eyes and let's begin. Man in the woods. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a break from the endless grind of deadlines, noise, and people. About 3 years ago, I booked an Airbnb that sat nestled in a forested area about 4 hours away from my hometown. There was no celebration, no birthday, no event, just me, a few days off work, and the promise of silence and stillness. The cabin was secluded enough, with only 3 or 4 other cabins dotted within a mile radius, and a wall of trees stood as its backyard. It was exactly what I'd imagined when I thought of solitude. I needed to feel small again, hidden, lost in the arms of nature. The drive was long but peaceful. It was early morning when I arrived, and the sun filtered softly through the tall trees, casting a golden hue across the gravel driveway. The cabin was charming, made of old timber but clearly modernized inside. I spent some time exploring the property. There were quirky little touches, like a hand-carved wooden swing on the back patio, an old iron weather vane, and a fire pit tucked off to the side, surrounded by tree stumps for seats. The air smelled like pine and damp soil. It felt good to breathe in a different kind of life. Later that afternoon, I sat on the swinging chair out back, sipping coffee and letting the quiet wrap around me. That was when I first noticed him, a man walking through the woods, maybe 50 yards out. He didn't seem suspicious at first glance, just a man, dressed casually, unremarkable in every way. I assumed he was staying in one of the other nearby cabins. After all, the forest was open to all. I watched as he disappeared deeper into the trees, his path curving until he was out of sight. I thought little of it. Maybe he liked hiking. Maybe he was doing exactly what I came here to do. Disconnect, be still, exist for a while without purpose. I lingered outside for another hour or so before heading back in to make dinner. I watched a movie on the couch, letting the dull warmth of the cabin settle into my muscles. Just as the film was reaching its climax, the doorbell rang. That surprised me. I hadn't even noticed there was a doorbell when I first arrived. I paused the movie and went to the door, a bit uncertain. Nobody should be here. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, and I wasn't expecting guests. When I opened it, I was met by the same man I'd seen walking through the woods earlier. He stood on the porch, his hands in the pockets of his jacket, a vague smile on his face. "Hey, sorry to bother you," he said, "but I've been kind of lost for a few hours. Now I'm trying to find my cabin." I stared at him. Something felt off, though I couldn't place it. He looked normal, clean, sane. But the way he smiled, it didn't quite reach his eyes. Something about him put me on edge. "Yeah, I guess I can help. Let me grab my phone and you can search the address," I offered, keeping my voice polite but cool. I shut the door and went to retrieve my phone. When I came back and opened the door again, he was gone. Not walking down the path, not waiting on the porch, gone. I stepped out into the yard and scanned the surroundings, but he had vanished without a sound. I shut the door quickly and locked it. My pulse was steady, but I felt the first tremors of unease. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't make sense of it. I tried to shake the thought, resume the movie, and force myself to finish the night as normal. Eventually, I went to bed. To my surprise, I slept well. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed some coffee, and went out to sit on the back porch. It was quiet again. No wind, no distant cars, just the rustling of birds and the creak of the wooden swing as I rocked gently. Then I saw him again. He was in the same spot in the woods as yesterday. Same direction, same slow walk. As if nothing had changed. As if I hadn't seen him at my door. My skin prickled. He didn't look lost this time. He looked like he was following a routine. I went back inside and locked the doors, then called one of my close friends. It felt better to talk about it, to share that rising anxiety. My friend agreed that something was strange, but neither of us could make sense of it. Then the doorbell rang again. I froze. I whispered into the phone what had just happened and left the line open as I slowly made my way to the door. I peered out through the peephole. It was him, again. This time, I didn't hide my discomfort. "Do you need something?" I asked through the partially open door, trying to keep my voice firm. He smiled, same as before, same half direction, void of any warmth. "Yeah, I'm lost again. Think you can help me get back to my cabin?" I didn't answer right away. I just stared. Then, he said it again. "Can you get your phone and search for the address?" The same exact words. The same sequence. My blood ran cold. I shut the door in his face, locked it tightly, and told my friend I was leaving. I didn't care how much time was left on the Airbnb reservation. I wasn't staying another minute. I packed in a hurry, throwing things haphazardly into my bags. I checked the peephole again. It was gone. I bolted outside, threw everything in the back seat, and climbed into the car. As I backed out of the driveway, I allowed myself one last glance at the cabin, and that's when I saw him, standing inside, behind the front window, watching me leave. He was already in the house. I don't know how, I don't know when, but he was there. I reported the incident to the Airbnb owner when I got home, but his response was disturbingly casual. He apologized, said he was sorry I didn't enjoy my stay, and left it at that. No offer to investigate, no hint of concern, just nothing. To this day, I don't know who that man was, I don't know what he wanted, but I do know this: he had a plan, and whatever it was, it never got to happen, because I left. But sometimes, late at night, I can still see his face pressed to the window, still smiling, still waiting, alone on the ridge. I've always been the kind of person who finds peace in the wilderness. While others feel uneasy when the cell signal drops, or when they realize the only sounds around them are wind and birdsong, I thrive on it. I've spent most of my adult life hiking the Appalachian Range, carving through trails in lower West Virginia, discovering hidden corners of nature untouched by roads or noise. My best friend used to join me on most of these backpacking trips. We'd plan one big hike every fall, an extended trek that would take us far from towns and lights. Just us, the trees, and the ever-shifting sky. But in 2019, something changed. We had our trip planned months in advance, a trail that would wind over the ridge and it led to a quiet lake at the top of a remote mountain. It wasn't a casual day hike. It was a week-long backpacking journey. We both cleared our schedules, packed our bags, prepared maps and food and all the essentials. But just days before departure, my friend had to back out. An emergency at work. There was no way around it. I was disappointed, of course, but I had already taken time off, packed everything, and mentally prepared for the journey. So I made a choice that in hindsight, I'll never forget. I decided to go alone. I arrived at the trailhead on a Monday morning. This wasn't a marked trail with neat signs and gravel paths. This was deep wilderness, navigation by compass, map, and natural landmarks. It was the kind of hike where your only guides were the shape of the hills and the position of the sun. It's aim for a distant ridge or a rock formation, reach it, and then pick the next landmark. No GPS, no app, just your instincts and your preparation. The first day was uneventful in the best kind of way, the kind where your boots crunch leaves, your breath fogs in the morning air, and your thoughts settle into a soft rhythm. I made good progress and camped under the stars, surrounded by nothing but tall trees and the occasional rustle of a nocturnal animal in the brush. The second day brought me closer to the ridge. The trail was demanding, a constant incline, and the light shifted faster than I anticipated. By early evening, the sun was sliding below the hills, and I knew I needed to set up camp before nightfall caught me off guard. I found a clearing tucked beside a line of evergreens, pitched my tent, and built a small fire. The heat from the flames was comforting. As the chill of autumn rolled in, I heated some food, sat with a book, and planned to turn in early. The crackle of the fire was the only sound I could hear, until it wasn't. I heard it. A sharp, clean snap, the sound of a branch breaking. It came from directly behind my tent. Not the kind of casual rustling you hear from a breeze or small animal. No, this was distinct, loud, intentional. I froze. The first thing that came to mind was a black bear. They were rare, but not unheard of in these parts. I moved slowly, unzipping the tent, flashlight already in hand. I stepped out, heart hammering in my chest, and swung the light toward the trees. The beam flicked across trunks and brush, but revealed nothing. I called out loudly, hoping to scare away any wildlife. Silence. Not even the sound of something retreating through the woods. That was what unnerved me. If it had been a bear, or even a deer, I would have heard it move away. But it was like whatever snapped that branch had vanished without a sound. I stood out there for several minutes, flashlight scanning back and forth, ears tuned to every gust of wind. Eventually, I doused the fire and crawled back into the tent. I couldn't sleep. Every sound made my body tense. Every brush of wind against the canvas made my heart skip. I must have drifted off at some point, though, because I woke up to the first blue light of morning. I packed quickly, my unease still lingering, and pushed forward. The ridge was close now, and beyond it, the lake I'd come to see. I made it by late afternoon. The trees parted to reveal the water, deep, still, and reflecting the orange and purple streaks of the evening sky. It was stunning, worth every step. I walked the perimeter, checking for any signs of other hikers. None. No tents, no campers, just me and nature. I chose a spot along the tree line to set up camp. The forest circled the lake like a quiet audience, and I felt somewhat reassured by the isolation. The fire crackled again as the stars emerged. I sat beside it, staring out at the calm water, letting my mind wander. I tried to shake the feeling from the previous night, tried to convince myself it was nothing. But then I heard it again, soft, subtle, a shuffling noise between the trees behind me. I spun around, eyes straining in the dim light. It sounded like footsteps, human, slow, deliberate. I stood, slowly turning, but could see nothing. The trees swallowed everything beyond a few feet. I felt my chest tighten, my breath go shallow. I told myself it was just paranoia, just leftover tension from the night before. But deep down I knew better. I stayed up late, listening, straining my ears. At some point, exhaustion overcame fear and I fell asleep, but not for long. It couldn't have been more than an hour later when I was jarred awake by the unmistakable sound of someone running past my tent. Heavy steps, fast, fleeing. I shot upright and threw open the tent, flashlight already in my hand. I caught a glimpse. A figure, shirtless, bareback, running into the darkness. My blood ran ice cold. I stood frozen, then looked down. There were footprints. Dozens of them, all around my tent, circling it, pausing, like someone had walked laps around my camp in the dark, silently, while I slept. I got the fire roaring again, sat with my back to the flames, and waited. All night. Nothing else happened, but the fear never left. At first light, I took pictures of the lake, mostly out of habit. But then I packed everything and started the hike back. I hadn't planned to leave that soon, but I couldn't stay another night. I felt like prey, watched, followed. The trail back was quiet, but I was different. I kept turning around, scanning the trees. Every breeze, every rustling branch sent my mind spiraling. It wasn't until I got home and started unpacking that I noticed items missing from my bag. Small things. A flashlight, a bag of dried food, a camping tool. Nothing major, but I never left my bag alone. I can't prove it, but I believe someone got into my camp while I was sleeping. Deep. Not just circled my tent, not just watched from the trees. They unzipped my pack, took what they wanted and left without a sound. That's what haunts me the most, the silence. Because someone who can walk right up to your tent, watch you sleep and leave with their prize without waking you. Story 3. The footprints in the storm. It was supposed to be a quiet week, a chance to reset, to sleep in without alarms, to enjoy the strange silence that settles over a house when no one else is home. My roommate had left town to visit family, and I had stayed behind. It was spring break, and my college classes were on hold. There was no work, no obligations, and no pressure to be anywhere at any time. It was just me, the house, and whatever I felt like doing. The storm rolled in on Monday afternoon. It wasn't unusual for this time of year, but something about this one felt heavier. The clouds hung lower. The wind was more violent. Trees bowed and groaned outside the windows as the sky turned a slate grey. Rain battered the roof with steady fury, and the old bones of the house creaked with every gust. The power flickered but held steady. I decided to ride it out inside. I had no reason to go anywhere, and frankly, no desire to venture out. I pulled a blanket over my legs, turned on my Xbox and lost myself in a video game. The storm became background noise, its angry howls blending with the digital sounds of my headset. Hours passed like this. It was almost 11 p.m. when something snapped me out of it. The doorbell rang. I paused the game and confused. Who would be out there in this storm? The wind shrieked outside, slamming water against the windows. The very idea of someone walking up to my porch in weather like this was bizarre. I hesitated, then stood up and made my way to the front door. The porch light flickered as I looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. I opened the door cautiously, half expecting someone to be hiding just out of view. But there was nothing. Only the rain lashing against the empty steps. I stood there for a second, getting soaked, before quickly shutting the door. Maybe it was the wind, I told myself. A branch hitting the house, or the storm itself somehow shorting the system and triggering the bell. It wasn't impossible, though the explanation felt hollow. Still, I went back to the living room, turned the game off, and settled onto the couch with my phone. The house seemed louder than before. Each gust of wind rattled the windows more violently. The rain pounded the roof like it wanted to punch through, but I tried to ignore it. I told myself this was normal. Nothing was wrong. Then I heard the crash. It came from the backyard. The unmistakable sound of something large falling, furniture maybe, followed by a series of thuds and scraping noises. I jumped up and ran to the back door. I didn't even hesitate to go outside despite the weather. The patio set had been blown over. Chairs lay twisted on the grass. The table was upside down. Everything was scattered. The storm had tossed it all like toys. I rushed around, gathering the chairs and dragging them toward the back of the house, hoping to shield them from the wind. The rain hit my face like icy needles. My clothes were drenched in seconds. As I pushed the last chair against the wall, I saw someone standing at the far end of the backyard. They weren't moving, just standing there, almost blending in with the shadows. A tall figure, completely still, watching me. I froze. The wind shrieked between us. I took one cautious step backward, then another, until I reached the door and slipped back inside. My heart was racing. I turned off the backlight, locked the door and backed away slowly. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I curled up on the couch, half wrapped in a blanket, phone in hand, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did for a while. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the storm. Eventually, exhaustion won. I must have drifted off sometime around 2 a.m., but I woke again. Not because of a sound, but because of a feeling. Something was wrong. I shifted, pulling the blanket off me and setting my feet on the floor. They landed in water. Cold, muddy water. I blinked, disoriented, then looked down. A puddle, right beside the couch. Then another and another. A trail of them leading across the floor. Each one faintly outlined with muddy footprints. They weren't mine. I scrambled to my feet, heart slamming against my ribs. The footprints led from the back door, through the kitchen, winding their way into the hallway, upstairs, back down. It was a map, an echo of someone's path through my home. I rushed to the back door, locked, but I hadn't locked it earlier, not after bringing in the furniture. My fingers trembled as I picked up my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher asked for my address. I gave it, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are they still inside?" she asked. "I don't know," I whispered. I didn't want to speak louder. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. What if they were still in one of the rooms? What if they were watching me right now? The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and remain quiet. I hid in the far corner of the living room, crouched behind the recliner with the phone to my ear and my breath shallow. Every shadow felt like it might move. Every creak of the house was a step. The police arrived after what felt like forever. I heard the knock, then the announcement of their presence. They didn't move until I saw the flashlights and the familiar blue and red reflection flickering through the windows. They searched the house, every room, every closet. They found nothing, but they saw what I saw. The muddy footprints, the wet trail that traced a stranger's journey through my home. They confirmed the back door had been unlocked when they arrived. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. Could be someone testing houses, one officer said, checking who locks their doors during storms. Opportunists. But there was something more disturbing about it than theft. Nothing was taken. No electronics, no jewelry. My wallet lay untouched on the counter. They'd walked in, wandered, and then left. Which meant the purpose wasn't robbery. It was observation. The idea that someone stood over me as I slept, close enough to leave wet prints on the floor around the couch, shattered something in me. A sense of trust, of safety. Even if nothing physical was taken, something else had been. Peace. The police couldn't do much beyond filing a report. They told me to stay with someone else if I didn't feel safe. But my roommate wouldn't be back for days, and I didn't have family nearby. I considered going to a hotel, but even the thought of sleeping anywhere alone felt terrifying now. I changed the locks the next day. I bought a security system, cameras, motion sensors, everything I could think of. But even with those in place, the memory of that stormy night clung to the walls. I'd walk into a room and expect to see footprints. I'd wake up and feel phantom moisture under my feet, and sometimes I still do, because whoever came into my home that night didn't come to take, they came to see, and they might come back. Story 4, The Man in the Mask. It was a favor, a simple agreement between close friends, one of those things you say yes to without hesitation, because that's what friends do. My best friend had a work trip coming up, a 2-week assignment that would keep them across the country, and they needed someone to house it. Just basic things. Feed their lizards, top off the fish tank, water the plants. That was all. No big deal. Honestly, I was excited. Their house was way nicer than my apartment, and for 2 weeks, I'd have the place to myself. A little vacation. Even if I was still in town, I'd have a big TV, a better kitchen, and peace. And for the first week, that's exactly what it was. It was calm. It was quiet. It was normal. Until it wasn't. It was near the end of the first week when I heard the cough. I was sitting in the kitchen, scrolling on my phone, half eating a microwave dinner when I heard it. A dry, unmistakably human cough right outside the back door. It was so close it made me jump. The kind of cough someone lets out when they're not trying to hide but aren't expecting to be overheard either. I stood up slowly, unsure if I should go to the door. My first instinct was that someone might have wandered into the yard, a delivery person, a lost neighbour. But why go to the back door? I walked over, heart starting to beat a little faster, and flicked on the outdoor light. Nothing. I waited. Still nothing. Eventually I peeked through the blinds, cautious. The backyard was empty. The night was dark, the lawn glistening with dew, and there wasn't a person in sight. But the cough had been real. I told myself maybe it was a neighbour. Maybe sound travelled weird through the yard. I tried not to think too hard about it. Still, I locked the doors, checked the windows, and returned to the kitchen. The next day passed without anything strange. I figured maybe I was just being paranoid. The house was unfamiliar. Every creak, every subtle hum felt exaggerated because it wasn't mine. My guard was up, I told myself. That's all. But that night, I noticed something else. As I walked out the front door to grab food, I glanced at the yard and stopped. There were footprints in the grass, freshly pressed down, a clean path of them. I crouched and followed the trail with my eyes. They started at the sidewalk, looped behind the house, then doubled back and returned to the street. Someone had walked into the yard, right up to the back door, and then left. Why? Why come all the way up, circle the house, and leave again without knocking or trying anything? I kept replaying it in my mind as I drove to pick up dinner. Was someone casing the house? A thief? A drifter? It didn't make sense. When I got back, I checked again for prints. They were still there, clear as ever, but I couldn't see anything new. No other signs, no new disturbances. I sat on the couch with my food, flipping through channels without really watching anything. My brain couldn't relax. That night, as I lay in bed scrolling through my phone, I heard the footsteps. They were soft at first, barely audible, moving across the front yard. I turned off my screen and held my breath, listening. The steps grew louder, moved across the porch, then around to the side of the house. I got up slowly and crept to the top of the stairs. Then came the sound that made my stomach drop. The back door handle turning. Not a knock, not a bang. Just a hand gripping and twisting the knob. I flicked down the stairway light without hesitation. It cast a pale glow through the downstairs hall. The sound stopped. No footsteps, no retreating noises, just silence. I took a few steps down and peered toward the back door. Nobody. The night beyond the glass was black. No movement, but I knew someone had been there, and then it got worse. Seconds later, I heard the shatter, the unmistakable sound of glass exploding, somewhere on the first floor. I couldn't see where from my position, but I heard it, sharp, sudden. I didn't wait. I turned and ran back upstairs, locking myself in the master bedroom. I pressed my back to the wall, phone in my hand, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The dispatcher answered and I whispered everything. Someone had broken in. I was hiding. I didn't know if they were armed. Then the chaos began. Downstairs I could hear him moving. Furniture scraping, cabinets slamming, the thump of something heavy being knocked over. It wasn't subtle. It was violent, angry, like he was destroying everything he could find. And then I heard him on the stairs. Every step closer. I locked the bedroom door, held my breath, and prayed. He tried the door handle. Locked. Then he started hitting it, over and over, with something hard, a bat maybe, or a crowbar. The wood splintered, the panels cracked. I backed away until I was pressed into the farthest corner. Then the door cracked open. His hand reached through the busted panel and unlatched the lock from inside. He stepped in. I'll never forget what he looked like. He wore a black hoodie, the hood pulled low over his head. His face was obscured by a mask, one of those cheap plastic ones with blank eyes and a faint, permanent smirk. In one hand he held a metal bat. He looked at me for just a second, and then he ignored me. He didn't move toward me, he didn't speak. He turned and started smashing the room. Furniture, walls, lights, one by one, never touching me, never acknowledging me again. Then he left the room. I stayed in the corner, frozen. I didn't move until I heard the sirens. The police arrived, but by then he was gone. He hadn't stolen anything, not a single item, but he had wrecked the place, and he had known I was there. That's what made it so terrifying. He knew I was watching. He didn't care. I wasn't his target, the house was. Or more specifically, the person who lived there. When my friend returned the next morning, she was devastated. Nearly everything she owned was destroyed. She couldn't think of anyone who might have wanted to hurt her. The police believed it was someone she knew, someone with a grudge, but no fingerprints were found. The man had covered his face and wore gloves. I described what I saw, but there wasn't much to offer. A mask, a hoodie, a bat, that was all. He never came back. But I still wonder, why didn't he hurt me? Why did he look me in the eyes and then pretend I didn't exist? And if he wasn't trying to scare me, why was he smiling? Story 5. The man in the rain working late nights at a gas station was never something I thought would bother me. When I first took the job, I figured the night shift would be easy. Fewer customers, more quiet time, and honestly more hours spent just scrolling through my phone or listening to podcasts while watching the rain paint trails on the windows. There's a strange kind of stillness to gas stations at night, especially when it rains. The world feels paused, like time slips into a pocket between streetlights and disappears. I had been working the night shift for a few months by then, and nothing ever really happened. People came and went, some polite, some grumpy. A few came in clearly on something, jittery or slow, but never violent, never threatening. I knew how to handle myself, or at least I thought I did. It was late, close to midnight, on a night when the rain had been steady for hours, not a downpour, just constant, rhythmic tapping against the windows, the kind of rain that keeps people indoors. The store had been dead for over an hour. No cars at the pumps. No customers coming in for snacks or cigarettes. I was behind the counter, thumbing through my phone, half watching the security feed that played muted on the little monitor below the register. That's when I heard it. A tapping on the glass door. Not loud, not frantic, just deliberate. A slow, persistent tap, tap, tap. I looked up. A man was standing outside, his jacket hood pulled up, his face half dazzled, the water glistening off his shoulders. He didn't move when I looked at him, just kept tapping on the door with one hand. I could see the reflection of the overhead light in his eyes, but not much else. The door wasn't locked. It rarely was during business hours, so I gestured to him, gave him a little wave, as if to say, "Come in." He didn't respond, just stood there, tapping. Eventually, I walked over and opened the door. He stepped inside silently. He didn't look at me, just walked past and headed toward the counter like he'd done it 100 times before. I followed, still slightly off-put by his silence. At the register, he finally spoke. "Cigarettes." His voice was low, scratchy. I asked for his ID and he handed it over without a word, paid in cash, took the pack, turned, walked back out into the rain. Only after the door had closed behind him did I notice there was no car. No vehicle pulled up to the pumps, no headlights down the road, nothing, just the sound of his footsteps fading into the night as he walked along the shoulder of the road, disappearing into the dark. I stood there, watching him go, waiting for some logical explanation to form in my mind. Maybe his car broke down further down the road, maybe he was staying nearby, maybe it was nothing. But the interaction hadn't felt right. There was something cold in his silence, Something calculated. I tried to shake it off and went back to restocking the shelves. It was almost 1 a.m. when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. Same sound, same door. I stepped out from behind the shelves and looked toward the entrance. He was back. Same man, same soaked jacket, same silence. But this time, he was holding something. A red gas container. He didn't speak, just looked at me, then pointed at the container, then toward the pumps outside. I stepped closer and opened the door. Out of gas? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He didn't respond, just handed me a credit card. I took it, walked outside with him and started the pump. The rain stung against my neck as I worked, trying to fill the container quickly. He stood behind me, silent, shifting slightly side to side as if restless or impatient. When the container was full, I handed it back to him. He didn't thank me, didn't nod, just turned and walked off again. That's when I noticed something. As I headed back inside, I heard a voice, not his, a second voice, coming from the side of the building. Low, urgent. I turned in time to see another man, thin, hoodie up, crouched near the side window, climbing through it. For a moment, I just stared. I ran back inside. And that's when everything happened at once. The man at the counter, another one I hadn't even seen, was already behind the register, grabbing packs of cigarettes, cash, whatever he could shove into a duffel bag. He looked up, saw me, and jumped the counter. I barely had time to react before I felt it. A sharp, blinding pain at the back of my head. The world went black. I came to on the floor, my head pounding. I didn't know how long I'd been out, minutes maybe. My hands were wet with blood, my vision blurry. I reached for my phone and managed to dial 911 with shaking fingers. The police and paramedics arrived not long after. I had a concussion, a deep gash that needed stitches. But I was alive. They showed me the footage later. The man with the gas can had never intended to use it. He was a distraction, a tool to keep me outside and occupied. While I pumped gas for him, his partners had circled the building, one through the window, one straight to the register. The whole thing was timed. And the worst part? The one behind the counter had a gun. Avid had been tucked into the waistband of his jeans. I hadn't seen it. But if I'd walked in a second later, or if I'd confronted him before the hit, things could have ended much worse. I quit the job after that. People told me I was lucky, and I guess I was. But there are still nights when I lie awake and think about how easily it could have gone another way, about how many things had to line up for me to survive, about how the tapping on the glass, something so small, had been the first signal of something much darker waiting just outside. Now, every time it rains and I hear that same soft, steady tapping, I wonder if someone's still out there, planning something else. Story 6. The dog, the door and the uniforms. I've done a fair bit of house sitting in my life. Some gigs were through friends, others through apps or acquaintances. When you're between jobs or needing extra cash, house sitting and dog sitting can feel like easy money, especially if the house is nice and the dog's well behaved. So when my friend Stacy told me she knew someone who needed a dog sitter for 5 days, I said yes immediately. Her friend, let's call her Brianne, needed someone to watch her husky while she and her husband vacationed in California. I met Brianne a week before the job. She gave me a quick tour of the place, a quiet suburban home in a fairly upscale neighborhood. The house had that clean modern feel with long hallways, big windows and rooms that smelled like vanilla-scented candles. Her husky, named Bear, was enormous, slightly overweight but full of that easygoing dog energy that made him more teddy bear than wild wolf. She told me I could help myself to anything in the fridge and pantry. The house had a security system and the front door had a keypad lock. It all felt secure. Friday came and I showed up with an overnight bag after Brianne and her husband left for the airport. The first couple of days were uneventful. I'd come home from my day job, stop by to feed Bear on my break, then return in the evening and hang out, watching movies and taking the dog for short rides in my car. Bear liked to sit in the passenger seat, his tongue out, eyes half closed with joy. I liked having him around. It made the house feel less empty. Monday night, around 9:30, I had just finished eating dinner and was relaxing on the couch with Bear snoozing nearby when someone knocked on the front door. That startled me a little. It was late and I wasn't expecting anyone. Twice I looked through the peephole. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered and wearing a black uniform that resembled a police officer's outfit. There was no patrol car in the driveway though, and something about the uniform looked off, like it didn't quite fit, or wasn't worn the way actual officers do. I cracked the door open just a few inches. "Hello?" I said, doing my best to sound confident. "I'm looking for a George," the man said. "George?" I repeated. "There's no George here. I'm dog-sitting for a friend. I've been here since Friday," I added, realizing too late that I probably shouldn't have said I was alone. He paused for a beat, then nodded. "Oh, okay. Sorry to bother you. How long are you here?" he asked. "Till Wednesday," I replied, trying not to let my nervousness show. He gave a short smile and walked away. I shut the door quickly and locked it. I texted Brianne and told her what had just happened. She responded a few minutes later saying, "Weird, but probably nothing to worry about." She didn't seem too concerned, which made me feel a little silly for being on edge. The next 2 days passed without much incident. I kept to my routine, Bear kept me company, nothing else strange occurred. Until late Tuesday night. I was already in bed, the lights off, Bear curled at the foot of the bed, snoring softly. I had just started drifting off when I had this strange feeling, a persistent little voice in the back of my mind whispering to me, "Go check the door." It was irrational. There was no noise, no movement, but I couldn't shake it. So I got up, tiptoed through the hallway and checked the front door. Locked. I turned and was about to head back to bed when Bear suddenly bolted up, growling. His fur bristled and he sprinted to the door, barking violently. That low, primal bark dogs make when they sense something's truly wrong. My heart pounded as I peeked through the peephole. It was him again. Same man from 2 nights ago. Except this time he wasn't alone. Another man stood beside him. Both were wearing matching dark uniforms. This time, they weren't moving. Just standing there, waiting. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. I stood perfectly still, watching them. They eventually turned and walked down the driveway. I waited a few minutes, then opened the door and stepped outside. No car, no sirens, no flashing lights, just rain-dampened silence. No security company logo on their jackets, no name badges, just plain black clothes that vaguely resemble something official. I went back inside and locked every door and window in the house. I checked the back patio and garage. Nothing disturbed. Bear kept growling softly long after they'd left, pacing near the window, ears twitching. I tried texting Brianne again, but she didn't respond that night. I don't know if she was asleep or busy, but I was left to process everything on my own. I didn't sleep much after that. Every creak of the house made me sit upright. I kept Bear close, grateful for the comfort of his presence. Wednesday morning came. It was my last full day, and I was grateful. I spent most of it packing, keeping Bear fed and happy, and waiting for the sun to go down. A part of me feared that they'd return one last time, that they knew my schedule, knew I was alone, that they'd be bolder the next time, but they never came. That night passed without incident. Brianne returned the next morning with her husband. She thanked me, paid me the agreed amount and made small talk while I gathered my things. I didn't bring up the second visit. I didn't want to startle her before she'd even settled back in. But it stayed with me, still does. Because I know those men weren't looking for a George, and they weren't from any security company. They knew I was alone. They had come back, and if not for Bear and that strange, quiet instinct that had me checking the door, I don't know what would have happened. Story 7. The motel visitor road trips can be liberating in a way few other experiences are. There's a freedom to drifting from place to place without a rigid plan. No tight itineraries, no reservations made months in advance, just a full gas tank, a loose idea of direction, and the time to get there at your own pace. I had always wanted to do a long solo road trip, and the opportunity finally came last year. 10 days off, 5 or 6 different cities to explore, and an open stretch of highway between them. For the first 5 days, everything went well. I stayed in a mix of decent hotels, all walking bookings made on the fly. I never had trouble finding a room, and I loved the spontaneity of deciding where I'd sleep only once I was already on the road. I had meals at roadside diners, took pictures of scenic overlooks, and drove under skies that shifted from warm, golden sunsets to star-studded darkness. It was everything I hoped it would be. Then came the 6th night. I was driving between 2 smaller cities, and by the time 11 p.m. rolled around, I was struggling to keep my eyes open. I had thought I could make it to the next major city and find a place to sleep there, but fatigue caught up with me faster than I expected. I pulled off the highway and searched my phone for nearby hotels, but one after another turned out to be full or not accepting walk-ins that late. I was starting to worry I might have to sleep in my car, which I knew would be dangerous, especially in an unfamiliar area. That's when I saw the sign. A glowing vacancy sign 10 miles ahead. I followed it without thinking twice, thankful to see something promising before true exhaustion set in. It was a small place, a roadside motel that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Single story, long row of rooms with doors facing the parking lot. A few cars sat scattered across the lot, but most of it was empty. The reception area was a tiny booth attached to the main structure. An old woman sat behind the desk, watching something on a fuzzy television set. "Do you have any rooms?" I asked. She nodded, sliding a paper register toward me and asking for basic information. I gave her my license and payment, and she handed me a key card. Room 8. It was at the far end of the row, tucked in the corner near the back of the building. I parked the car, grabbed my duffel bag, and made my way to the room. It wasn't much, but it didn't need to be. I was tired. The bed was clean, and I had a lock on the door. I changed into something comfortable and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the rain begin to fall outside. Then came the knock. I hadn't even turned off the room light when I heard it. 3 short raps on the door. I froze. A knock at this hour? I walked over and opened it just a crack, the chain lock still in place. A man stood there, middle-aged, greasy hair, unshaven face, mumbling to himself under his breath. He looked up at me only when I opened the door wider. "Hey," I said cautiously, "can I help you?" He didn't answer. He just pushed forward suddenly, slamming his shoulder into the door, but the chain held. I stumbled back from the force of it, slamming the door shut and throwing the bolt across. I heard him mumbling again, this time louder, more agitated, but not directed at me. More like he was talking to someone else, or to himself. I looked through the peephole. He turned and walked off without another word. I waited for a few minutes, listening to make sure he was gone. Then I called the front desk. No answer. I waited another 10 minutes before calming myself enough to lie down. I didn't expect to sleep, but at some point I must have drifted off. It was some time later, maybe an hour, when another knock woke me. Only this time it wasn't a knock, it was a pounding. Violent, repeated. The door shook in its frame. I jumped up and went straight to the door, checking to make sure the lock and chain were still engaged. They were. I looked through the peephole. It was the same man. Only this time he was screaming nonsense, yelling phrases that made no sense, broken sentences, fragmented thoughts. He rammed the door again and again, the entire room vibrating with each slam. Then I saw it. A flash of silver. He was holding a knife. He raised it and began jabbing it between the door frame and the lock, trying to pry it open. I backed away, fumbling for my phone, calling 911 with shaking hands. I explained the situation, gave the address from the motel receipt, and begged them to hurry. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, telling me not to make noise, not to provoke him. The pounding continued. The knife scraped at the metal. At one point I thought he might actually break through, and then it stopped. Silence. I waited, holding my breath, listening for movement. Nothing. Not a footstep, not a voice, just the sound of rain on the window. When the police arrived, I was still crouched in the corner of the room, holding the phone like a lifeline. They searched the premises but found no one, just a broken window in one of the vacant rooms nearby. The glass shattered inward, a trail of muddy footprints leading away from it and toward the woods behind the motel. Gone. No name, no record of a guest matching his description. And when they traced the credit card I'd used to pay for the room, it came back flagged. It had been stolen. Not by me, by the man. Apparently the card he used earlier to rent another room had triggered an alert, but the system hadn't caught it in time. They suspected he was using stolen IDs and cards to rent cheap rooms in different towns. But that didn't explain the rage, the screaming, the knife. The police said it could have been drugs, or psychosis, or worse. But none of that mattered to me. All that mattered was that a stranger tried to force his way into my room with a knife, and that if I hadn't kept that chain lock bolted, if I had just opened the door an inch wider, I don't know what would have happened. But I don't stay in roadside motels anymore. Even now, sometimes, when I'm alone in a hotel room, I'll check the lock 4 or 5 times before I sleep. I keep something heavy near the bed, a chair under the knob. The fear never quite leaves. The memory never fades. Because there's something deeply haunting about being alone in a place where nobody knows your name and someone tries to break in, not to steal, not to rob, but for reasons you'll never understand. Story 8. The Man Across the Street. When I first moved into the new house, it felt like the beginning of something fresh, a way to reclaim peace after my previous landlord abruptly decided to sell the home I'd been renting, leaving me scrambling to find a new place in less than a month. What I ended up with was unexpectedly ideal. A recently built house, tucked on a quiet street at the edge of a suburban neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, new, and entirely mine for the duration of the lease. I was relieved to move in. Everything about the house felt like an upgrade. Bigger rooms, better insulation, modern appliances. The street was quiet, and there weren't too many houses clustered close together. The neighbors were spaced out, and everything seemed peaceful until I met the man across the street. Or rather, until I noticed him. He never came over, never said hello, never smiled or waved, but he watched me. There are a few days when I started to see him, always in the same place, always doing the same thing, standing in his driveway or peering out his front window, staring directly at my house. At first I thought I was imagining it. People look around all the time. Maybe he was just zoning out. But the frequency, the persistence, it became hard to ignore. Every time I stepped outside, there he was. If I walked to the mailbox, I could feel his eyes on me. If I took out the trash at night, his silhouette was visible in the window, watching through the blinds, and it wasn't subtle. He wasn't trying to hide. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe I was the first new person to move in on this street in a while. People are creatures of habit, and change can stir attention. That's what I kept telling myself, but it kept happening. And then it escalated. The first time I heard the scraping sound, it was nearly midnight. I was in bed drifting off when the sharp metallic sound jolted me upright. It wasn't coming from inside, it was outside, faint but distinct. The sound of something heavy being dragged across concrete. I got up and looked out the bedroom window, which overlooked the side of the house. At first, I couldn't see anything. The yard was dark. The only light came from the distant street lamp, casting soft shadows across the lawn. Then I saw it. He was dragging a large ladder across his own yard, slowly, methodically, toward the side of his house. His movements were odd, Neither hurried nor casual, just steady, intentional. Why would anyone be using a ladder at midnight? The next morning I brushed it off. Maybe he had some roof issue, maybe the timing was weird, but the action innocent. Had he become paranoid? But then he started getting closer. One morning, I came downstairs and opened the blinds to let in some light. He was standing at the end of my driveway. Just standing. Not walking a dog, not doing yard work, just watching. I closed the blinds slowly and tried to ignore the rising unease in my chest. Later that day, I drove to a nearby store. When I pulled out of my garage, he had returned to his own yard, but remained fixed on me, his expression blank, his posture stiff. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified. Every creak of the walls felt like a footstep. I got up several times to check the locks. Then, around 2:00 a.m., I heard it again. Footsteps in the backyard. The yard was fenced. No one should have been able to get in without me hearing a gate open. Yet I could hear the unmistakable crunch of grass beneath someone's feet. I sat up, holding my breath, straining to listen. Then the footsteps stopped. I waited. Nothing. Eventually, I crept out of bed and approached the window at the back of the house. I pulled back the curtain just an inch and saw him, far back in the yard, near the fence, standing, watching. His face was barely visible, but I could see the outline of his frame, motionless, unmoving. I backed away from the window, locked myself in my room and called the police. When they arrived, he was gone. I explained everything. They searched the yard, but found no sign of a break-in, no footprints, no evidence he'd been there at all. They knocked on his door and spoke to him, but he denied everything. Said he'd been asleep, said he didn't know what I was talking about. The officers told me that without hard evidence, there was nothing they could do. They couldn't accuse someone just for standing in their own yard, and since he hadn't technically done anything illegal, they couldn't issue a warning. I was told to keep a record if anything else happened, so I did. I started documenting everything, dates, times, behavior. I installed cameras, one at the front door, one pointing into the backyard. I kept the blinds closed and avoided going outside unless necessary, but I still saw him, constantly. Even when I couldn't see his face, I could feel his presence. A glance through the peephole would often reveal him in his window. When I left the house, I could sense his gaze following me down the street. Then came the final night. It was a Tuesday. I came home from work, exhausted, and went straight to bed. I didn't even bother turning on the TV. I just wanted rest. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I woke up to a loud thud. It came from the wall right next to my bed. A heavy, dull sound, like something slamming into the side of the house. I sat up, heart racing. I waited, then slowly got up and walked to the window. What I saw still gives me chills. His face, pressed against the glass. He was standing on a ladder on the second story, looking into my bedroom window. I screamed. He jerked back, then scrambled down the ladder and took off into the darkness. I called the police immediately. This time, they caught him. He had left the ladder behind and was found a few blocks away, pretending to take a walk. They couldn't prove he had intended to harm me. Standing on a ladder in someone's backyard in the middle of the night was enough to get him arrested for trespassing and attempted unlawful entry. The officers also found gloves in his pocket. He never admitted anything, said he was just fixing something in the neighborhood. Eventually, I broke my lease and moved out. The property manager didn't fight it. Once I shared the police reports, they let me go without penalty. A few weeks after I left, I received a message from one of the other neighbors, someone I'd barely spoken to while living there. They told me they'd had weird experiences too, that they'd seen the man peeking into their windows on more than one occasion, but had never reported it. Part of me was angry. If they had spoken up, maybe none of it would have escalated, but a bigger part of me was just relieved to be I've since moved to a new place, different town, more populated, but the habits remain. I keep the blinds closed. I check the locks 3 times before bed. I glance at every window twice. And I never forget the feeling of his eyes, cold and constant, watching from across the street.